Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at our Prominent Speaker online series organized by the National Library. I'm Thiru from the National Library. The National Library regularly hosts renowned speakers from the arts, heritage, technology, and social sciences sectors to share with the wider community and to exchange ideas. So we are very happy to have with us this evening Professor Arnoud De Meyer, who will share with us on how he got interested in the late 70s in management of innovation, long before it was a fashionable subject. While it is impossible for him to summarize all the insights he has developed over a 35-year of his research career, he will offer some observations on what he considers the most important principles of innovation management. He will also describe the research journey that led to his latest book on the role of ecosystems in innovation, Ecosystem Edge, Sustaining Competitiveness in the Face of Disruption. He calls himself a reluctant academic because it was not what he wanted to be at the outset of his career, but he became passionate about the combination of rigorous research with the challenge of translating research results into practice and considers being an educator as one of the greatest jobs in the world. I shall now hand over the time to Professor Arnoud De Meyer. Professor, please.
Good afternoon or good evening to all of you who have joined us for this webinar. What I was going to do is talk a little bit about my academic interests. Some of you may know me as the president of SMU, and if you look at the back here of my screen, you will see that that's a picture of Singapore Management University. Of course, over the last years, I spent a lot of time in managing the university, working with students, etc. But I have a sort of other part of my life, which is my academic part. And what I wanted to do with you is to tell a little bit about my journey, how I got interested in innovation management in the 70s, actually, a long time ago in previous century, what I did, and I will explain this through 3 books that I wrote. I wrote more books than that. I think that I have about 12 books that I have written over my academic career, but I will pick 3 of them because we're at the National Library Board. We have to talk about books, right? And so I will talk about 3 books that I have written and use these books to give you some insights on the ideas that I developed over the years. And I called this A Tale of 3 Books. You see also a picture of SMU here of our law school. Where did it start? Actually quite simple. I was trained as a master in electrotechnical engineering. I have a master's degree in electrotechnical engineering from a university in Belgium. And I got also a master in management that I did immediately after my electrical engineering studies. And sort of you see that from the beginning, I actually have a bit of a cross-disciplinary start. I managed to study electrical engineering. My mathematics were very good, by the way. But at the same time, I was interested in management. And then I had to do my national service. And I was lucky because after my initial training, like you do here at Pulau Tekong, I was detached for a year to a division in the armed forces in Belgium that explored what the potential was of military and government contracts to stimulate commercial innovation. And in a sense, by doing so, I started thinking about what are really sources of innovation. And then I went to work in process engineering division of a petrochemical company in Belgium again. And strangely enough, my boss asked me only to work 45 hours a week. And actually, I was willing to give more. I was willing to work harder. So the question arose in my mind, can engineers, process engineers, can they be better managed? You see how from a rather cross-disciplinary training, I started thinking about questions that had to do with how to manage innovation. For reasons that are not pertinent here and that I don't want to go into, at some moment in time, I had an opportunity to go back to university to study for a PhD. And in those days, we could study in Belgium in a combination of a local university with a university in the United States. And I went to MIT in Boston or in Cambridge in Massachusetts to study for my PhD. That PhD was really smacked into the target of how to improve productivity in industrial research and development libraries. And then when I came back to Europe after my studies, I joined INSEAD in 1983. INSEAD is a business school in France, 60 kilometers south of Paris. And I was given a free rein to do research on technology management. And those among you who would be old enough to remember the 80s of previous century, 80s and 90s, when we looked at technology, we looked at Japan. That's where the innovation was happening. That's where we found new manufacturing techniques. And INSEAD gave me the opportunity to discover what was going on in Asia, in Japan in first instance. Then we had a number of continuous education programs here in Singapore, in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur, in Manila. And I was asked to come and teach about technology management in these programs. So I discovered Southeast Asia and I discovered Singapore. And then in 1998, and I jump already from 83 to 98, 15 years further, I had grown into the management of INSEAD, and I was asked to actually set up the campus of INSEAD here in Singapore, which is in North Buena Vista. So I moved here to Singapore and I made Singapore my home. While I was sort of going through this, and you see that I was confronted with how do you innovate with what's happening here in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, I kept on doing research, and I fast forward to 2004, when on the basis of a survey of companies here in Southeast Asia and 30 short case studies, creative technologies was among them. We're talking about 2000 to 2004, yes, right? But also some companies in Indonesia, some companies in Korea, even a company in Manila and Bangkok. We sort of looked at different companies in the region and said, what is it that is typical for innovation? How do you manage innovation in this part of the world? And you see my first book, Inspired to Innovate, Management and Innovation in Asia, the first book that I want to talk about here. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole book because I have two more to do. But what we actually just wrote down in this book is that there are sort of 8 things you have to do very well if you want to innovate. The first thing, and now you're going to get in 8 lines, 30 years of research, not only by me, but by others. The first thing to do is listen to the user all over the world. And we emphasized that it was listening to the user, not the customer. We're sitting now on Zoom here today. And who is the customer for Zoom? It's probably some of our organizations that do that. Maybe for the National Library Board, it's the National Library Board that bought Zoom. But you are the user of it. And you may have comments on how to use Zoom, how to improve Zoom. And so for a company like Zoom, it would be very important to listen to the user all over the world. The second point that is very important, maybe I should say something more about all over the world. Don't go only in the top places where people do innovation. Don't go only in Shanghai, Tokyo, Venice Beach in California, perhaps Paris when it comes to fashion. Go also to places where perhaps there are different type of users that have different ideas about using your product. Listen to the user all over the world. The second thing that you need in innovation is leadership. You need to know where to go, or sometimes also even where not to go. In a company or in an organization, at the government, you need to know where you want to go. What are your objectives? What is it that you want to achieve where do you want to, and that's the title of this slide, create value. And then, of course, capture the monetary rewards of that value. But where do you want to create value? And for top management, for leadership, it's important that you have a very clear vision, but at the same time that you combine that with a very clear communication of that vision. It's not only sufficient that you would keep it for yourself, but you also need to make sure that everybody in the organization knows in which direction we are going. We need to make sure that the noses point all in the same direction. Thirdly, I've learned over my life that innovation is not without risk. Actually, over my life, I've started together with friends, sometimes with students, 6 different companies. I know what it is when you fail. In 2 cases of these 6 entrepreneurial initiatives, we had at some moment in time close the books and say, this doesn't work. We failed. Under no circumstances will or should all innovation projects succeed. And you see also here that I say should, because if you don't have failures, maybe you don't take enough risk. Maybe you're not innovative enough. Now, the 4th point is, of course, you need to be creative. You need to have imagination. Interesting enough, I put that here only as the 4th point. Yes, you need imagination. You need the creative designers. You need the creative inventors. You need these sometimes nerds who actually come up with great new ideas that have that imagination and creativity. But I wouldn't put it as number 1. I wouldn't put it as the most important part of what we're doing. The 5th thing that I always say is, when you innovate, do it all together in your organization. Do it all together in your company. Make sure that you have an integrated approach, that the commercial people, the engagement people here in the National Library, that the people who are actually producing the new ideas, the ones that have to do the financing of it, the accountants, the pure operations, that we all work together in an integrated way. Because what the user needs is not defined by our organizational structure. The 6th point that I learned is that, and actually Thomas Edison, who is always known or presented as one of these major inventors, the one who invented our light bulb, but also actually the use of electricity throughout the city of New York. He already said that innovation is about 5% imagination, but 95% hard work, perspiration. That hard work is about projects, about good, excellent project execution. And I will come back to that in a few minutes. My 7th point is, while you're innovating, you always create new information, new knowledge. You create data, that is structured data becomes information, and actionable information, information with which you perhaps will do new things in the future, will become knowledge. That knowledge needs to be protected, needs to be managed, needs to be organized. You need to make sure that you keep the knowledge that you're building up. And that's my 8th point, the result of your creative efforts needs to be protected. And so you have to ask yourself, what is your intellectual property policy? That's what we argued in that book in 2004. By the way, often people have asked me, why you only have 8 lines? How can you summarize 30 years of research in 8 lines? Well, that's because I wanted to share it with you. I wanted to share it in the book. But why precisely 8? In Europe, I usually have difficulties to explain that. But all of you know why 8. It's a lucky number, right? And that's my 9th point. A bit of luck in innovation may also help. It's not all going to go smoothly. You need to manage a little bit your luck. But in that same book, we asked ourselves the question, are there some things here in Asia that perhaps are not as good, not as perfect? And we wrote in the book, and that was 2004, and I let you reflect whether that's still true today, That is that we probably needed our organizations here in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, but also our neighboring countries and Korea, Japan, China. We probably have sometimes organizations that are a bit too narrow at the top, where too much power is concentrated at the top. And that top then becomes a bottleneck for strategic decision making, for the risk taking that we were talking about. Secondly, we have a culture here that is one of respect for hierarchy and elders. That's very good for implementation, but it's not always good for creativity. By the way, I am sorry to say so for myself, but younger people are more creative than older people. So it's the younger people lower in the organization that often have these great creative ideas, but do they have the way and the opportunity to share that with the rest, or do they have to pay their respect all the time to professors like me or to elders like some of you? And then we were used to execute. We were in many cases a server or an agent for a principal somewhere else in the world. Second point that we observed is that Asian organizations need to learn how to handle what we call the intangibles, such as brands, intellectual property, know-how, etc. We like physical, material infrastructure. We're perhaps not as good as in managing the intangibles. We also need to have different methods of market research. I have kept on saying this, the market research techniques that were developed for the United States, where you have a very individualistic, masculine culture, where it's perhaps the marketing techniques that were discovered there is perhaps not adjusted to an Asian culture where we are more group-oriented, and where we perhaps perceive some of the characteristics of a product or a service in a different way. And then finally, notwithstanding the fact that we have good programs in design here in Singapore, and the government has actually made an effort to create a design center and a design prize, frankly speaking, we're not good yet in pure design. Creative Technologies was a great company, but it was Apple that came up with, actually, technically speaking, not such a great MP3 player, but one that was designed so well when it launched its iPods. Now, my next puzzle that I came to after 2004 is project management under high uncertainty. I said that innovation is 5% about imagination, 95% perspiration. 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. So it's about hard work and project management. So my next puzzle was really about how do you manage projects well, but under high uncertainty, because when you innovate, you have uncertainty. You don't know how the customer will be reacting. It's not like building a building, constructing a building. It's not like designing a ship and then launching the ship. It's often about things you don't know how to do it. There is actually quite a lot of knowledge and experience about project management. And we know how to manage risks. There are hundreds, if not thousands of books written about risk management. And the big accounting firms can give you very good guidelines about how to measure and mitigate risk. And yet, when we look at innovation, so many projects run over time and don't even achieve their objectives. And that is because when you innovate, we have unknown unknowns. Not only known unknowns, the things we know that we don't know, but the things we don't even know that we don't know them. And that suddenly will hit us. We wrote a paper about it, published in 2002. And guess what? In September of 2002, Donald Rumsfeld, who was then the Secretary for Defense in the United States and the leader of the invasion of Afghanistan, and then later Iraq, said something that caught the attention of the media. Don't take no for an answer, but not the traditional N-O, no, but no for an answer. And he said there are things we knew There are things we know we don't know, but there were also in this war in Afghanistan, the unknown unknowns, things we don't know, we don't know. We were very happy to hear that because as academics, it's very rare that a Secretary of Defense or at least one of his staff members would have read our paper and would have taken our lines that we had actually published in January of that year. But it's really, what do we do in project management when we are confronted with uncertainty? And there we published another book, and that is my second book that I want to mention here, called Managing the Unknown, a new approach to managing high uncertainty in risks in projects. What we actually write in that book, based again on many case studies from all over the world, is when you have unknowns, when you have unknowns, a project is not a sequence of tasks, and like you do when you construct a building, where you have a sequence of tasks. And those among you who know something about project management know you will have a Gantt chart and you will have a critical path and you manage the tasks. But when you manage against the unknown, you have to manage a sequence of decisions. And decisions you can take in two ways. You can tackle projects under uncertainty in two ways. It's first of all a darwinistic approach. That is, you launch a lot of projects in parallel and you see which one succeeds. An example of that is one that we studied with the Honda Motor Company when they were designing cars in the 90s and the 2000s, and where they, because they wanted to go fast with developing new cars, where they would have teams that would develop a door. The door is quite a complicated component of a car. They would have several teams that would, in competition with each other, develop doors. And then one of the doors would be selected in the end for the final design of the car. So you launch several projects in parallel and you have a sort of survival of the fittest. That's the reason why we call that the selectionist approach. Or you can have a learning approach. Think about the fact that you would go and do sort of a trip in a landscape in an area where you've never been before. And yes, you have a map, but it's not very clear in which direction to go, and you're searching. What you're going to do is probably walk a little bit and then see, am I on the right place? Have I learned something? Is this the right direction? Is this still fitting with my map? If you climb a mountain, maybe you will then build a base camp and say, I've learned so much, I've achieved already so much. And now I'm going to look at the alternatives, try some, maybe have some errors, come back to the base camp, do another, go in another direction, and we consolidate what we learn. We could mathematically prove that there are only those two ways of working when you are confronted with uncertainty. We illustrated it with a lot of examples, and we also mentioned that the project infrastructure, the leader of the project, the organization, the way you incentivize members of the project need to be adapted to the approach you take. And that leads me to my third book, the one that is published a few months ago, and maybe was the reason why the National Library Board approached me to have a conversation with you tonight. In fact, this was the result of 12 years of work in parallel with my managerial duties of managing the university, in collaboration with my co-author Peter Williamson, who is still at the University of Cambridge. It had all started in Cambridge in 2008. You see here a few pictures, myself, a little bit younger than what you see now in my webinar here. My co-author, Peter Williamson, a picture left on top of the business school at the University of Cambridge, and then a pub in Cambridge, because it all started over a glass of wine in Cambridge. The observation we made was that we both had studied some entrepreneurial companies around the university, and we were sort of exchanging our experiences, and we had both come to the conclusion that the entrepreneurship in Cambridge was very different from what we had learned and read about entrepreneurship in California, in Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, often entrepreneurship is identified with one or two people. Everybody knows Zuckerberg of Facebook. Everybody knows Ellison of Oracle. Everybody knows who is leading Microsoft and who is driving Microsoft. So we know who the entrepreneurs are. In Cambridge, usually it was a group of people. It was much more a teamwork, and nobody was sticking out. Nobody was saying, I'm the entrepreneur here. In fact, there were like 42 people who were all entrepreneurs who were working together, helping each other. Sometimes a small company that was producing a product that could only be monetized, could only be sold if it was used with another component from one of the other companies in Cambridge. And we actually came to the conclusion that these companies, these entrepreneurs in Cambridge, were working in a sort of ecosystem. So we used that term from biology, where plants and animals live together in symbiosis sometimes in an ecosystem, and they need each other. And you cannot destroy the ecosystem, or some elements of that ecosystem, some animals or some plants will die away. So that's where it started. And we said, maybe we're onto something. Maybe there are other companies that are successful and that are working in ecosystems. And actually, yes, we wrote cases about Amazon Web Services, AWS. You probably don't know them. You know Amazon from other of their activities, but they are the biggest cloud service in the world. They have a dominant market share of 32% in cloud services. The next one, Microsoft, has only 16%. And actually today, Alibaba, which has about 11 to 12% of market share, announced that for the first time they were making some money out of it. Why was it that AWS has a dominant market share of 32%? Why did London Stock Exchange pay $27 billion for a company called Refinitiv that was formerly a part of Thomson Reuters and that is producing financial data? Why is it that The Guardian, a somewhat old-fashioned newspaper in the United Kingdom, has been able to build itself into a globally very successful news website? Actually, probably with more subscribers and more people consulting them than the BBC, Wall Street Journal, or even the Financial Times. Why was it that here in Singapore, Rolls-Royce, the company that produces airplane engines, was able to build up very quickly a supply of skilled employees when it launched its manufacturing site here in Seletar, here in Singapore? Think about it. They needed about 2,000 skilled workers, but nobody here in Singapore had ever produced an airplane engine. The closest factory of airplane engines was in Japan, 6,000 kilometers away. How do you build actually an ecosystem that can produce the skilled workers and the engineers that you need in a factory of 2,000 people for Rolls-Royce? And there they had to build an ecosystem of course, ITE, Institutes of Technical Education, the polytechnics, NTU, NUS, in other words, the engineering schools, and some other schools, and TUC, the union. They had to build actually an ecosystem of people that would contribute to education and continuing education in the business of airplane engines. Why was it that the Cambridge headquartered producer of RISC processors, ARM? You all use RISC processors. These are reduced instruction set controllers that you have in your smartphone, probably 4 or 5 in your smartphone. ARM has a 95% market share worldwide of the design of RISC processors. And because they were so good, they were sold in 2016 for $31 billion to SoftBank, the Japanese company. And it had at that moment only about 4,000 people worldwide, a small company compared to their customers like Apple, Samsung, LG, Huawei, Xiaomi, etc., why would they actually be able to make so much money? And by the way, SoftBank wants to get rid of them, not because they're not good, but because they can make money out of it, because they will probably try to sell them for $40 billion. In other words, $9 billion more than in 2016. That seems to be a good return on investment to NVIDIA. Why is it that probably a company you don't know, but it's the second biggest software producer in Europe, Dassault Systèmes. They produce product lifecycle management system software, which is like computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. Their share price multiplied for 7.5 times over 15 years. And then the last one, because I want to spend a minute on them, is the Alibaba Group. The Alibaba Group, which is a phenomenal success, the biggest company in Asia for the moment. They have annual revenues in 2018 of about $800,000 per employee, while Amazon did actually only $360,000 per employee. Why is it that they can do that? These companies were successful because they innovate. Alibaba is a very innovative company. They innovate through ecosystems. And our point in the book is, when confronted with high uncertainty, ecosystems, loose networks of companies that work together, like that sort of small network of companies in Cambridge that I was referring to, they may well be the best form of organization to innovate. It's not that Alibaba knew this from the beginning. It's not that Jack Ma says, I'm going to create an ecosystem. But in their annual report of 2019, one of my research assistants has told me that the word ecosystem comes back 169 times. I haven't verified it. I believe him on his word, but they didn't sort of said from the beginning, we are going to be an ecosystem. We're going to be like in the nature, plants and animals that sort of adjust one to another, live in symbiosis sometimes with each other, have no contracts with each other. They didn't do that from the beginning. They were in the beginning a pure platform, like we know them here in Singapore, to provide services, charging memberships to users. But then in 2004, 2005, they decided to create Taobao as a marketplace to compete with eBay. And then, of course, in 2008, they created Taobao Mall. And when they created Taobao, they understood that their role was to concentrate on providing a standardized platform, but that could attract many partners to come and work on that platform and innovate on that platform. Not like Uber. The drivers of Uber or the drivers of Grab don't innovate. But Alibaba will attract partners that can innovate. So you have to avoid tend to become the bottleneck. And so gradually, Jack Ma and his team developed this ecosystem thinking where they say, we're an enabler of e-commerce infrastructure. We become the place to go for consumer e-services. We get the network advantages associated with large number of buyers and sellers. And we create a big Taobao that is a sort of an ecosystem of many partners that work with us together. And they did the same with Ant Financial Services, Alipay, and a few other financial services. And some of you may know that very soon the idea is that Alipay, that Ant Financial Services will go for a long-awaited initial public offering and IPO in Hong Kong. So we focused really in our book on how do you manage these business ecosystems, these networks of organizations and individuals that co-evolve their capabilities and roles and align their investments to create additional value and improve efficiency. So 3 elements in this definition are very important. It's about creating value through your innovations. It's about a network of people that co-evolve and their capabilities and align their investments. They do it because they want to work with each other, not because they have a contractual agreement. And we've learned that out of the 8 examples we use in our book, that you do a lot more joint learning. You can become a leader in innovation like Alibaba. but you do it in a very flexible way. In other words, you can cope with crises much easier. And that's the relevance of this book today, because this pandemic that we go through is a crisis, and many companies, many organizations will have to reinvent their business model. They will have to reinvent how they create value and what value they want to create for you as consumers, as users of their products. Now, how you do that and then scale up very quickly, boy, it goes much better, a lot faster when you do it in ecosystems rather than in a vertically integrated and strictly controlled supply chain. Go for a collaboration within an ecosystem. An example of that is Haier. I don't know whether you know the company, but it is in a company it's a white goods company, the biggest producer of white goods like washing machines and dishwashers and dryers and so on and so forth in China. They have a platform, a little bit like Alibaba has a platform that is called Cosmoplat. And they have also decided that they will have 4,000 micro enterprises that will collaborate with them. So they've actually asked their middle managers to become entrepreneurs, to do their own thing, to go independent. But they stay in the ecosystem of Haier. And through the platform they have, they can redesign their supply chains very quickly, which, for example, they did in March when they helped some of their suppliers to start making masks for and other personal protective equipment. They also helped another company to produce testing and isolation cabins to cope with COVID-19 and isolate patients. And they were able in 1 month to produce some of these cabins in which they could isolate patients because they could very quickly redesign their supply chain. Of course, you expect me that I'm now going to explain you what is in the book. I don't have enough time for that, and I hope actually you will read the book. It is available in the library. Or you can go to my website that I will share with you a little bit later. But in the book that was published a few months ago through Stanford University Press, we talk about how you create additional value, how you start and develop an ecosystem network, how you overcome inefficiencies, because if you just collaborate with each other, maybe that's not as efficient because there are potential transaction costs. We tell you how to unleash learning and innovation. We work out how and where to take the profits, and we lead how to lead the ecosystem. And that's what I want to finish with, because leadership is very important. Remember, that was number 2 on my list of 8 points. How to provide leadership in innovation. How to make sure you have a vision and communicate it well. But if you work in a system like Alibaba, where you have so many partners that do all kinds of independent things, you cannot tell them what to do. You have to convince them. You have to cajole them sometimes. You have to, and maybe that's a bad word, but seduce them to do the right things. And how you do that? How does a Jack Ma really do it? How does some of the CEOs that we study really do it? Because they have a very high capacity to listen, both to those within their own organizations, but also to listen to very weak external signals and messages from partners. Weak signals, things that people don't express very clearly, can't express sometimes very clearly. They're very adaptive and encourage and nudge the ecosystem to respond flexibly to uncertainty. They influence people, they use soft power, a little bit like Singapore tries to influence the rest of Southeast Asia. You can tell them what to do, but you can try to influence them. You can use your soft power that comes from your clear vision, your credibility, disrespect, and the evidence that bolster your cases with partners. Why is it that Jack Ma could convince people in Alibaba to do what they do? Because people respect him. And then, of course, there are people who want to collaborate and getting things done through a community of peers. This is more than collaborative leadership that sometimes is demonstrated in companies. It is about leading beyond your own organization. It's about building consensus. It's about being a very active networker, becoming a trusted source of knowledge. And it's also about being able to live with dilemmas, with diversity, while at the same time you have to develop an overarching identity and a goal for the ecosystem. You also at the same time need to be very efficient. You need to embrace what we call in the literature, we have to be ambidextrous.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor, for the sharing. So, Professor, we have a question here from Sharon Ting. So her question is, when you don't know what you don't know, how do you project manage the innovation? And how then can the timelines and objectives be managed?
That's a very good question. And Sharon, I have to say, my answer may disappoint you, but let's take the example of vaccine development against COVID-19. We know that we want to do it. We know that it's urgent. We know that there will be a lot of unknown unknowns. I was reading today in the press that for the first time they report that actually there are quite a few people that actually have been a second time infected. In other words, the antibodies that you develop after the first infection do not guarantee you that you will be protected against a new infection. There are lots of unknown unknowns like this. We really don't know what this vaccine will be doing. Some of us have heard that people say we will have a vaccine by March next year. I always remind people then that in April 24, the Secretary of Health of the United States said we will have a vaccine within 2 years. But that was April 24, 1983. And he was talking about a vaccine against AIDS or HIV. We still don't have a vaccine after 36 years. So a guarantee that it's not because you put in a case like this a deadline that you actually will be able to meet that deadline. What is it that we can do is, in this particular case, because there is a lot of money available, there's a lot at stake, and we want to go as quickly as possible. What you see is that we apply what we describe the selectionist approach or the darwinistic approach. There are more than 150 groups currently trying to develop these vaccines. I pray that they will be successful. I hope they will be successful. Is it guaranteed? I don't think so. But it's good to apply this, what I would call a selectionist approach. And by doing so, create a bit of competition between different groups. And hopefully that way we will go fast. But do I believe that we can actually make a project schedule and say by March of next year, we will have a vaccine? No. What we can do is prepare ourselves that in case the vaccine is developed, that we then can go as quickly as possible. In other words, we can make sure that the production capacity is available, that the logistics are available to bring these vaccines around, that we have what is predictable, i.e. the glass containers in which we probably will have to put these vaccines, that they are available, etc., etc. But around the vaccine itself, I'm sorry, I don't think we have any certainty. On the other hand, there are cases where you develop in the face of very high uncertainty, but where the time pressure isn't that high, and perhaps where the time pressure, but also the budget is not that important. I think then sometimes about art, where an artist will express herself or himself, and perhaps is learning how to do it, is trying out different, I mean, when you look at some of these wonderful pieces of art out of our history, be it here in China or be it in Europe, you will see that in many cases, artists tried out a lot of things before they finalized in the end their masterpiece. It's a little bit like that too in the case that you're confronted with uncertainty and you're innovating, and when budgets are not that high and where timing is perhaps not that critical, then you go for this learning approach and you learn gradually how to do it. Planning is something we do when we have certainty. High precision planning is when we have certainty and there is a lot at stake, like in building a nuclear power station. That's what we call very often high precision project management. But when it comes to this fuzzy area of innovative, uncertain projects, which is not product adaptation, product development, but true innovation, I think we have to live with the fact that it's very difficult to set an end date and that we have to have a very different way of managing this.
We have some questions coming in. Okay, we have Wee Chiang. And Wee Chiang is actually wants to know why advanced countries, for example, America, deal with COVID issue lightly compared to Singapore.
I'm not a specialist of psychology or sociology, but I have my impression that I will share with you. But if you disagree, I will immediately give it. But I think it has something to do with culture. That is that in the United States, individualism is very strong. And it is your personal responsibility to take care of yourself. And it is your personal right to do what you want to do. It is not only in COVID-19. You can see it in the whole gun control debate and the fact that it is actually in the Constitution that you can actually defend yourself and take your right in your own hands. It has something to do with that individualism of the United States, which has its very positive sides. It leads to very strong entrepreneurialism. It leads to a willingness to try out new things. I'm setting up my own company, etc., etc. While we, and I say we because I think some Northern European companies share this with Singapore. That is, we see the group and the society as more important than the rights of the individual. And in this particular case, the right of the individual has to give in to protecting the society. So it has something to do, in my opinion, with the culture. Of course, there have been differences. If you have followed this a little bit, there are differences between, for example, Sweden and Norway or Denmark, where in Norway and Denmark, they've basically done the same as what we've done here in Singapore, that is early detection, tracing and tracking, isolation of people that were infected. Sweden has actually opted for a system whereby they hoped on herd protection. If many people get infected, perhaps the society will build up sufficient resistance against the virus, which is what we know from other viruses. That is that if 45% of the population, maybe a little bit more, has been infected and has built up antibodies, that actually the virus will disappear. There are differences in approaches, but I think the difference between the United States and Singapore has a lot to do with primacy of the individual over the group or vice versa.
All right. Okay. Next we have Kumari. Kumari, thanks you for an interesting lecture. And she is actually mentioned that you have acknowledged in your 2004 book that there are some areas which could be improved in order to enable innovation in R&D in Asia, such as some of our traditional organizational hierarchies and values. Do you then see these structures being dismantled over time in Asia, especially, I guess, now when, the situation has totally changed and there's so much of uncertainty?
I think that there are some changes in what I will call the positive sense. In other words, for example, I think the realization that intellectual property has an important value that realization has risen in Asia. We don't copy that. Uh, uh, there is no impunity anymore for copying. We have strong IP regimes here in Singapore, but also in other countries. We have grown in IP. I think we've developed better systems for market research, although there's still a little bit really lacking. But frankly speaking, the organizational structures haven't changed that much. I still see quite hierarchical structures, and I bet that many of you young people who are listening here still are frustrated that there are creative ideas that they have, and that when they're at the bottom of the organization, they would like to change the organization, that they cannot express them well enough because there is this very strong respect for hierarchy, very strong respect for, and there's a very strong power distance. This will take quite some time. What I do see changing very strongly is the willingness to be an entrepreneur. When I came here in 2010, we had very few entrepreneurs at SMU. Today, our incubator is full of budding entrepreneurs, and parents accept a little bit better that their son or daughter actually forgoes a good job in a bank for trying out to be an entrepreneur. So I see that mentality change. But the innovation in larger companies still can still be improved significantly.
Okay, thanks, Professor. The next question is from Derek. How do you see Singapore lead in innovation, especially in economics, medicine, and transport in Asia beyond Hong Kong and Japan?
We have very good research and development at our universities. You know that NUS, NTU, and I would add SMU, SUTD, do a great job in terms of research, and they're ranked among very good universities in Asia. NUS is, when you look at pure publications over the last 5 years, number 15 or 16 in Asia, after Tokyo University, Seoul National, and a group of about 10 Chinese universities in pure output of research. NTU is in 29 or something like that. So very good universities when it comes to research and development. We need to translate that into commercial innovation. And that requires an absorptive capacity, if I use an economics term, in our companies. And that's where we in Singapore have a disadvantage of having a very small market. Israel is a very small market too, but they have very good relationships with the United States. Switzerland has a very small market too, but they have a very good relationship with the European Union and the big countries there. We have a small market locally, and somehow we have not, and I am careful in my comments here, but we have not yet cracked the nut of making Southeast Asia our market. I still think that quite a few of our young Singaporeans feel very comfortable, are world citizens when they go to Tokyo, Shanghai, Paris, London, New York, feel very comfortable there, and don't feel that comfortable to go to Medan or to Chiang Mai and go and do business there. So we are not very comfortable about working in our backyard. And yet, that is what we need to do if we want to be really successful in leading in innovation, so that we can translate the very good research that is happening here at our universities, at A-Star, and at some of the other research institutes. When we want to translate that into commercially successful innovations, we need to have markets. And our markets are at our doorstep. But when I ask my students, how many of you have been to Indonesia except for Bali, I get very few people raising their hands. And yet it's only 20 minutes from here.
Okay, we are going in for the last question. Sharon Ting is back. She wants to know, in your analogy, for example, when you mentioned Alibaba, she wants to know who then finances, the ecosystem where they promote innovation. in the example of Alibaba?
Alibaba creates, and the same is true for Hire, if you would look at what they have been doing with Cosmoplat. They create a very and simple environment in which it's easy for small partners to actually get onto the platform and to innovate on the platform. In other words, they make the threshold to get onto the platform and innovate on the platform is very low. They don't charge excess fees or something like that. They're going to make money out of using the data. Alibaba, I mean, is making money out of using the data and perhaps charging a little bit like the ERP we have here in Singapore, our electronic road pricing. We charge a little bit of money each time you pass through the platform, you pass under the ERP. They also make some money available, co-invest with some of their partners if they need to make some investments. So they provide the financing, and that's one of the reasons why they created Ant Financials. Ant Financials was actually a combination of different financial instruments, Alipay, but also some stock market investment, stock brokers activities, and also some financing of new projects. But the great thing for Alibaba is that when you apply for money from Alibaba or for Ant Financials, they already know so much about you. They know whether you're creditworthy. They know whether you pay your bills on time. They know when you buy something, whether you pay, how fast you pay, whether you're reliable, because they have all the data of all the people on the platform. They know more about you than your bank, much more, because they also know what kind of products you buy, how quickly you buy, when you buy, in the month, etc. They know so much about you that they can easily facilitate credit to some of the innovators that come to their platform.
Okay, and with that, thank you once again, Professor Arnoud, for your presence today and joining us. We've now come to the end of the program, and we'd like to thank all the participants and hope the session was beneficial to all of you. And we hope to see you again in another National Library program.